So we're at the point now I'm going to start working on some smaller, finer detail paint work, and I'm going to start installing some smaller details, and I'm going to work on the handrails. But the first thing I'm going to do is start blackening these grills. I'm going to start doing some of the fine detail work, like painting this door and things like that. And I'm also going to work on the sill real quick. On the prototype, the sill was repainted. Originally this would have been a white sill stripe across, and then it would have had the safety stripes, but at some point in time they repainted the sills with this crappy looking rusty red color, and then they put the safety stripes over that, so I'm going to go ahead and replicate that. Later on I'm going to start working on all the mud splatter and everything on the fuel tank, and then work on all the discoloration areas and everything. And then there's that discoloration of the hatch there we're going to work on. There's a lot of paint chipping and scratching and stuff on this, so there's a lot of work to do, as you can see. So one thing at a time though. I'm just going to go ahead and knock out the grills and the sill at least tonight. Alright, I got the walkways done. I got the white trim done, the decals. You can see the discoloration on the sill. So you can see that little outline where the color changes. That's where they stripped the old striping off and they redid it apparently. So it's this odd dark maroon color compared to the rest of the body. And then there's the door, which I think came out really good. It's nice and dirty looking, nice and crusty. And I just did that to match the prototype door, because apparently at some point in time the door got replaced. This is not the original door. It went from 1 year having the door that matched the finish to the next year basically having the door from another unit put on it. It's not the same size door either, so it must have just gotten replaced. But anyway, the paint was hosed on that door, so that's what I had to replicate. It's the same on the sunshades of the cab, and there's some scratching and damage to the cab side too. There's also a little bit of this paint chipping on the front door of the engine there, so I'm going to have to replicate that too. There's a little bit of spots. There's a lot of paint chipping on this. I mean, it's pretty extensive. This is going to be a lot of work to replicate this. Fortunately for you guys, I will be breezing right through all of this, so you guys will see as I do it. Anyway, the model's coming along. It's really starting to actually look like the prototype. Here's the opposite side with that sill done. I got all the final steps installed. I kept those off during painting. You can see they're also installed now. And then I also got the plow painted. And then the nose is also done. I got the detail painting on the nose. The grab irons are painted. The little box there on top, or the little round vent. And I got the warning label too. So the cab is the next thing I got to work on. I'll have to put the horn back on that, and we'll start weathering that too. Alright, here's where we are now since the last clip. I now have most of the body wrapped up. I got the nose permanently installed and in place. It's glued in. I finished the weathering on the nose for the most part with dry brushing effects to create that beat up look. Did some detail painting there. Got the detail painting on there, and then the front handrails and the plow are on now. The front handrails were tricky because I had to make my own custom spacing for the stanchions. I just basically could only reuse the middle portion. I reinstalled those, painted those, and then I had to make my own outer handrails because these were a Canadian design. I have a little jig that I made a while back for these Canadian style handrails where I just bend some phosphor bronze wire to the size. I think this is 0.20-inch wire to do that. So those are in place and they're painted and they look pretty good. And then the North Little Rock style plow is installed. And that looks really good. Everything's really coming along on this. I also finished the handrails on the back. Same thing. And then if you look, I got the numbers done on the hood. I decided to use custom decals for those as well. I ended up getting some custom decals made by Circus City Decals. He was nice enough to make me a large sheet of custom 6313 numbers for the cab and the sides, and he made me a whole bunch of other numbers series for various engines that I'm going to be doing, which was really nice of him. And this only cost like $50 to do, which is really great. You get a lot of decals, so I was able to use the custom 6313s for the cab. So you got the very unique lettering on the cab there, and then on the sides, very unique, and they just are really nice. He does some exceptional work, so if you guys need to hook up on some custom decals, get a hold of Circus City Decals. I mean, I'm telling you, these guys do amazing work. It's amazing. And then here's the other side with that. So the cab's pretty much ready to be reinstalled. I just got to put the bulbs back in it. Alright, and other than that, I've been also working on the chassis. I got it pretty much together. The fuel tank is weathered up. I did all that based on the prototype photos. The fuel tank on this particular engine is very beat up. It's got all kinds of scuffs. On the interior, I did the mud splatter spray effect. It's kind of hard to see, but I did that based on prototype photos. And then there's the trucks, which came out really good. They're installed. The wheels are painted underneath. You get all the splatter on them. They look really nice. They're very grimy and very dusty from use on CSX because they use a lot of sand on their lines, particularly because CSX is a mountain road. This locomotive ran and it got a lot of this dust all over it, so I was trying to replicate that. So that's what I was going for with the look. So you can see it's got all the, again, real nice dust effects. This took a couple hours, so there's a lot of work in between the last clip here and this one. But at this point, the shell is ready to go back on. Like that, and then I'll be able to put the cab back on, and then I'll be able to start putting the other side handrails on, and I'm going to be working in various steps. I'm going to start weathering the decks, and then as I do that, I'm going to weather the hoods, and then I'll slowly start reinstalling the handrails as I go. So that'll be the next thing, and I can slowly start also adding all the details back to the front and then weathering the pilots too. So that's next. Alright, so I'm going to actually film this clip here for you guys because someone actually asked me about how to make these. On the 6313, it's got a large yellow jumper cable on both pilots, and they both come out of these little MU receptacles, the stands, and so I wanted to talk about how I actually make these. So what I have here in my hand is actually some Athearn wiring. This is off the newer RTR. It's pretty thin, and this is what they use for their light bulbs. And so this stuff is actually great material to use for making your own custom MU cables. You can make speed recorder cabling out of this. You can make sanding line cables for your trucks, and of course these MU jumper cables as well, which is what I'm going to be showing you guys how to make. So the first thing I do is I'll take the scrap wire out of an Athearn engine that I might not need the lights for, and I'll just take and I'll kind of try to bend it and stretch it out a little bit like this, and I'm just trying to work out any kind of extra little kinks or anything like that. And then after that, it's just a matter of using a pair of pliers and trying to bend this into shape. Normally what they do is they route the cable and it'll look like a large B hanging down, and it'll usually connect to a hook underneath this little cross platform here. So what I like to do is I'll nip off with a pair of toenail cutters, actually, the end of the wire. That way it's a nice clean piece of wire. Then what I'll do is I'll straighten it out and I'll start bending. I'll get a large section like this, and then I'll start working the bend around like this. And it takes a little bit of coaxing, but actually once you get this, once you start bending it up, it'll start kind of, it'll start going along with what you're doing to it, is what I'm trying to say. It'll start letting you manipulate it a little bit more, but at first it's kind of stiff. Anyway, you just start roughly forming your bend, okay, like this. That's the rough look of the cable. That's what I want it to look like. Just like that. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut that little bit of wire off. After you've gotten this cable bent, this should be what it looks like overall. It's going to be coaxed into its final position as we install it into these little receptacle holes. And on the ends too, you'll notice I've actually bent them a little bit. That way they'll fit right in these holes. So basically what I do after that point is I'll just take it, I'll insert the end of the cable into the little hole in the Detail Associates receptacle piece that I glue to the styrene stock for the stand, and it's actually pretty straightforward from there. After that, I will install the Detail Associates MU caps, and that will basically be the finishing step for this. Alright, so I got the unit up here on my mixing bowl, and I'm going to start doing some of the washes, and I'm going to start paying some more close attention and start filming some of these steps so you guys can see this, because obviously you want to see the weathering steps for these. But I'm going to start laying on the washes for the deck, and I'm going to start working on the pilots a little bit, getting those grimed up. You guys have seen me do my washes before. I usually use a mixture or a combination of earth brown and black from Anita's. It's this paint here. This is really good acrylic paint. I just use a small, finer brush like this. This one's a little bit worn out, but it'll still do the job. I just load my bristles up basically with a little bit of water. I'll take a little bit of earth brown and then a little bit of black. I'll usually go more earth brown than black because the black is obviously pretty overpowering. And I'm just going to start mixing this paint right on my little bit of paper here, and I'm going to mix in a little bit of water as I go. I want this to be a relatively wet wash, but I want it to be pretty well saturated with paint so I can get all this covered. I'm just going to start in certain little areas at a time, and I'm just going to build all this up. Now later on what I'll do is I'll cover all this with powders, but this is just going to be a good base for the powders to stick to. This dark wash. Also, I won't have to apply as much powder to get the darkened effect by putting this wash on, because it'll provide a good color base and background for this. And I'm just going to apply this kind of blotchy, and it's going to go all the way around on the decks and walkways of this locomotive. The exact same wash is what I'm going to be using for the pilots as well, because the pilots get very dirty, and a lot of the grime and dirt gets kicked up onto the pilots from the tracks, the wheels, and everything up. Mainly on the snow plow, and then you'll have the defined kick-up lines, just like what you'd see on a tank car or a box car. At the end of a piece of rolling stock, you'll have the actual spray lines, and then you'll usually have some concentrated mud splatter. So I'm going to be adding all of that to these pilots as we go, but for now I'm just working on the walkways, and I'm going to get all of these around the cab, the nose, everything. Normally with these locomotives I would just take a larger brush and I'd just completely cover these decks up, but the 6313 has a pretty dark colored deck, and there's also a lot of dust on it, so I'm going to be doing this a little bit different than I normally would. And so in this particular case I'm only going to be putting a little bit of grime around where the stuff would be running off the nose in these walkways, and I'm just going to be tucking it in these corners and then fanning it out a little bit. So I'm just going to be applying some of this dirt and grime and everything around the nose and places like that. Spread it out a little bit, but I'm not going to go too crazy with this. It's just working it around the nose and then these walkways. The sides are going to basically be the same. I'm just going to be applying some of this powder just along certain parts of the walkway, getting some of that runoff and grime coming from the top of the engine. But again, most of this is a pretty dark grime color, so I'm not going to be going too crazy with that. I'm just going to be highlighting certain little areas, skipping over some, and again, after I do a little section at a time, I'll just fan it out just a little bit, diffuse the color a little, just like that. Alright, let's pause the weathering real quick to get you guys updated on where we're at right now. I've been working on this for 2 hours tonight, Saturday night here. I got off work, came home, and started working on this, trying to get some more stuff tied up for the weekend. I got the cab installed, as you can see. That's the big step here, the big thing. And then the side railings have finally started to go on. And I finished the weathering on the deck. There's that dark, subtle grime tone that we were talking about. It's a pretty dark, I'll zoom in so you guys can actually see it better. You can see it's a pretty dark tone of grime. And I'm going to enhance that with a little bit of white chalky powder. On the sides again, I reinstalled the handrails to the cab after I got the cab installed. Really annoying with these Athearn handrails because they're freaking warped. It's just a constant pain with these. You gotta play with them. It's really annoying. So you can see the stanchions are all bent, even though these things are drilled out to match. It's so annoying. I really get annoyed by that. Anyway, on the handrails, I had to modify the front railings to match the Canadian style step, or what originally was there. So I just cut the original grab off and replaced it with one of my custom made handrails, same on this opposite side. I'm going to have to repeat this process one more time for the back railings. Once I put the side railings on, I'm going to have to do that for the back set as well. Again, everything's really matching up to the prototype. On the cab sides here, I had to finish the weathering on the sunshades and stuff. I realized I didn't do enough chipping. Also, I finished the chipping on the sides with the numbers now installed. You can see I did the side swipe. Apparently this locomotive had been side swiped several times, so I had to replicate that. And there's the front, again, really starting to look like the prototype now. The tanks on the side are done, and I got most of the washes and stuff done on the sides. I'm ready to start working on the grime and everything, and I'm going to start laying in with the powders, and then I'm going to be doing a lot of heavy powder weathering on the top because the real thing's real grimy. Again, as a comparison photo, I got a photo of the real engine This is before it got shipped back to MEI in 2016 and then later went to WSOR. You can see the paint chips on the sunshade. That's what I had to re-replicate, and then there's some rust starting on the door, so I'm going to add that with some oils and stuff later. And then there's some rust working on the pilots, and then you can see there's a bit of grease down the side, so that's what I'm going to start working on next. But I'm pretty tired. I'm going to go ahead and call it a night. Tomorrow later on in the afternoon I'll come back and I'll start wrapping this up, but there's a good chance tomorrow I might actually have the whole thing back together and finished, so we'll see what we get to. Okay, the next step here is to start doing all of the dust, dirt, grime, and rust that's built up and accumulated in these doors. You can see there's a lot of dust and a lot of rub off, a lot of soot and everything running down from the top. It's all over the place, it's running down the sill, and it's very dirty, so we're going to start replicating that now. And I have the model set up here, and normally I use washes, but since I want to replicate more of a dusty look, I'm going to be using mostly powders. So I got my Bragdon and AIM powders set aside. I'm going to be using those, and I'm going to be using micro brushes mostly to apply the powders in these doors. So I'm using some dark earth powder to come in, and I've already hit up this grill because there's a lot of grime in this grill. And I'm going to start streaking it down somewhat softly with a soft bristle brush. And this is just going to start doing some finer streaks. I'm going to come in with a micro brush and I'll do some more defined, finer detailed streaks in a second. But this is the base coat. This is going to be the stuff that's coming up the bottom of the sill, around these hatches, around these doors. More of the flat layer of dust. So I'm going to apply that here and work it up like this along the base and around this grill work. So you can see from the last clip I went and brushed in some powders into the door cracks all over the sides, and then I just used a wet Q-tip to wipe off the surface of the door, avoiding the edges and so much around the bottom because I was trying to keep some of that heavy grime layer in there. You can see there's a lot of grime at the base of the door around that blue stripe, and then it's just in the door cracks. That's kind of what I wanted to go for here. The next step is I'm going to use some black AIM Products soot. And I have a very small micro brush here. This one is real fine. You can see just how fine that is compared to a regular brush. And I'm going to be taking a little bit of black powder relatively lightly. I'm going to try to take off some of the extra. And I'm going to be using this to go in the doors and fill in some of these doors with a little bit of this black powder. And this is a pretty basic effect. You don't need much pressure. Just randomly go in and I'll just start filling in these little cracks. Just here and there, it gives some shadowing. A little bit of randomness here, and then I'll kind of go in certain little spots, model some grease streaks, just very fine. These are the kind of little details you can do with this effect with these smaller brushes. Here's the powders done on the sides. I also did the chipping on the safety stripes while I was working on that, and I brushed some of that chalk and everything. Same on the side of the cab, gave it a little bit of a dusting. And on the sides I did the black greasy streaks on the side. I gotta brush that in a little bit more to make it a little bit more subtle because it's too defined right now. But for the most part we got the dusty look achieved, and then we have all of the grime and everything on the side. So if you actually look down the side of the hood, you can see where the doors are all filled in. So that looks really good. So yep, next step here, applying oils. I'm going to start applying some rust streaks and things on the cab, on the sides of the battery boxes, and on the sills. Alright, now if you remember, I said that the locomotive had been sideswiped several times and there was some evidence of scratches and stuff on the sides and also on the fuel tank, which is the most common area you'll see scrapes and scratches. And you got to remember, this is the part of the locomotive that's the lowest to the ground. It's exposed to weeds, debris, all kinds of stuff that will scrape up against the side of the tank. And especially with the tank that might be covered in a lot of rust or something like that, you'll see these scrape lines in it. So one of the ways I like to do this, after I've applied my powders to the tank, and you can see I've done several layers of dust, dirt, and then a little bit of black to kind of subdue it a little bit, I'll take a dry paper towel or something like that, and I'll just go along like this, and I'll scrape it. I'm putting this on the side pretty roughly like this, and this will take some of that powder like that. Now, that does a pretty good job, but if you want to get even more extreme, you bring in the old coarse grit file. And check this out. What I do is I very carefully take this, put it directly on the side of the tank, and I'll very carefully slide this down. I put very little pressure. Remember, this tank is painted, so I don't want to dig through the paint or anything. I just want to have the scratches, and then I'll just kind of put them along the bottom half of the tank and then on the side like that. You can go pretty heavy with that, but try to be careful you don't overdo that, because you'll real quickly overdo this technique very quickly. So you want just subtleties with the scratches, but you can see right there now we have some really realistic looking scratches down the sides of the tank. And that's exactly what I wanted. It's the same on the air tank as well. You can see I did some scratches up here as well before I put the chassis, or put the shell back on the chassis. I went ahead and did the tanks, and then you can see I pretty much had the whole locomotive reassembled. I got the couplers on in the ends, so we'll go ahead and continue the weathering. Well, I always like to say I want to do something different, and this is definitely different. We're going to take a look at this model outside in some actual nice, better outdoor natural lighting, so you guys can actually see this. Scaled down on a module here, it looks just like the real thing in my opinion. It looks real good. You can see it's all finished up, everything's all tied together, the handrails are done. This was actually the last thing I installed, was the handrails on the side, and I kept those as straight and even as possible. And then I did all the chipping effects on the sides. Overall, everything came out really good. You can see all the grime and rust and safety stripes. I really like the side swiping and the damage to the side of the cab, and then that door. It all looks really realistic. It looks real nice. Try to bear with me here, I got some traffic going by. Anyway, on the front, all the detailing looks really nice, and we'll do a kind of a pan around so you guys can see everything here. Here's a decent look at the side of the cab with all that detailing. Again, it all looks real nice. You can see the concentration of grime and rust and spray on the trucks, the mud splatter and everything. That's an effect I really love to do. That looks real nice. Alright, and here on this opposite side you can see all the nice detail of weathering effects and everything. All these effects combined, it makes it look really realistic. So I'm very happy with this engine overall. I'm very pleased with it. The last thing I got to do is get a decoder for it, and then it'll be ready to run. But that's going to wrap up this video for now, guys. Thanks for watching this build. I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.